Welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
Christine.
Thank you so much for organizing this and for having me here. As James said, I work for GEMS Education, and I develop design and technology programs across our schools. I'm just a little bit curious, though, about all of you. How many of you work in the field of robotics? Yes, okay, Jose. Has anyone built a robot before? Okay, a few people. Programmed a robot? Right, pretty much the same folks. Okay, so I would argue that robots or robotics is really something for everyone, not just for students, but for all of you. We could actually bring the lights down because I'll have pictures in this. So when I tell people that I do a lot of work with robotics, I usually get a little bit of a double take, that I'm not kind of the stereotype of what people have when they think of people who work in robotics. I'm a middle-aged mom of two with a philosophy undergrad and an elementary ed graduate degree. I have no experience in hard sciences, and I am by no means an expert in robotics either. But I can build a robot, I can program a robot, and I would say that more than anything, what I am is a robotics and making advocate. So we'll just start off with some of the stereotypes that people have when they think about who are the people behind robotics, who are the people who can access robotics. So we've got geeks, nerds, mad scientists. You guys all saw Back to the Future, right? Okay. Some of us in the theater and some not. We don't typically imagine groups of girls. When we think about robotics education, whether it's happening in the school or in the home, we tend to think even of a male teacher and male students. Not typically of groups of moms. You know, when you think of who's building a robot, you don't typically imagine your own mom doing it. And I really think that there's something empowering about sharing robotics with everyone and allowing everyone to access this. I'm just going to briefly tell you my story, kind of how I got into this. 6 years ago, I was hired by the Abu Dhabi Education Council as an ICT advisor, not because I knew anything about technology, but because I understood teaching, and they wanted somebody who could help their technology teachers understand how to work with youth. And then I was told that one of the first things I would need to do is to roll out the Lego robotics program across Abu Dhabi, which terrified me. Fear struck deep in my heart. And once I pulled myself off the floor, I went to the local mall in Pennsylvania. I'd never been to this part of the world, and bought a Lego robotics kit. It was about $350 US, and it sat in the box next to the television, staring me down, making me feel guilty night after night for about 3 weeks, at which point I decided I could really use the $350, and I returned it to the store and tried to pretend that the whole experience had never happened. 4 months after I got to Abu Dhabi, one of my coworkers knew that I knew nothing about this and sat me down and gave me 4 hours of an intro to robotics. Here's how we build it. Here's how we program it. And after that, I felt like this massive weight had been lifted off of my shoulders, not because I could engage in what were my professional responsibilities, that was good, but because I realized that this was not something so difficult. It was something that, frankly, if I could learn, anybody could learn. And it was a lot of fun, and it made me feel like going out and creating new things. So if you look at the pictures that I have up here, moms are an incredible resource anywhere in the world. Typically here in Dubai, but not just here in Dubai, you're looking at moms who spend a lot of time with their children, managing their children's education, but don't necessarily have a STEM background themselves. So while they say, yes, this is important, my child should learn how to program, my child should learn robotics, it's not necessarily something that they have access to or feel like they can understand. The best way to do it, of course, is just to get your hands busy and to do it in a way that's demystified. So this is a group of moms that I get together with once a month, and we learn new things, sometimes involving robotics, sometimes not. So you can see a group of them soldering, which was a lot of fun, kind of three-ring circus of soldering. The house was not burned down. And breaking out the sodium hydroxide to make soap down there. So the idea is, how do we kind of take the fear out of robotics that this is something for somebody else? Killer robots. And kind of develop a warmer, fuzzier, accessible attitude towards making and programming robots. So there's a professor named Mimi Ito from UC Irvine who came up with a term called hamago. Has anyone heard that before? Okay, so the first time I heard it, I assumed it was like a fancy kind of sushi, but it's not. It stands for hang out, mess around, and geek out. We're going to do a little bit of that today. I did bring, as James said, some things. So anyone who wants to stay back later and play with some robots, we can do that. But for the hanging out part, if you look around you, you should find a brown bag someplace nearby, and there's something in that. And what I want you to do is to pair up with somebody else. Just take 2 minutes. Create something that says something about who you are, kind of like a mascot. And it's totally fair game to trade with people. And while I don't really advocate stealing, I'm not really watching either. So this is the messing around. We've been hanging out, we've had coffee. 2 minutes, maybe not even. Time constraints, good for creativity. I have to say 8-year-olds are much louder doing things like this than you guys are. That's my Lego! Take about 30 more seconds. Okay, and even if you're not feeling 100% satisfied with your mascot, we can freeze on that. You're welcome to stay and play with Legos after, though. This is where it's very hard to get people to stop fiddling with the Legos. So you were just messing around with the Legos. What skills did you need to bring to that, working with somebody else to create kind of a mascot or a way to introduce yourselves to each other? Communication? Imagination? Yep. Anything else? Some fine motor skills, absolutely. Sometimes a challenge first thing in the morning. Time. Yeah, time management. Anything else? Negotiation at all? Yeah, sorry? Imagination, okay. So these are not really what we would think of as technical skills, right? You're messing around, you're having fun with the Legos. And I would argue that in the end, when we engage in building and programming robots, the most important skills are actually probably not the technical ones that we get out of it. But what if we could add a motor to that? Or add a pulley and belt? Or a sensor, so that it could interact with the environment in some way? Could you do more with it? Could you express more with it? Would it make you a little bit nervous to think about needing to then program it? Maybe a little bit? Okay, so this is an example. It's a little hard to see up here, but I do have Scratch open on one of the computers back there. This is a very simple programming platform. It's called Scratch. Has anyone seen it before? Okay. So Scratch was developed by the MIT Media Lab, and it was intended to help children as young as, say, 6 years old learn how to engage in some basic programming. What's really interesting about Scratch is that, I don't really advocate teaching 6-year-olds how to program. If they're interested in it, great, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. But it's a mind shift, because children are consuming media from an incredibly young age. They're playing games. But when you teach them how to use something like Scratch, you're teaching them that they can create things, that they can create these games, that they don't need to just be consumers. And the same could be said for all of us. It's not to say that you're going to come out and be a professional game designer or robotics programmer, but it helps you to see yourself not as somebody who's just going to buy the robot and put it in your house, but somebody who can really think about how you can customize this, how you can make this something for you, what you want from it. And Scratch was particularly popularized by Mitch Resnick, who is the head of the lifelong kindergarten program at MIT. And there's a real sense that this encourages play-based learning, not just playing. Online, playing in general is great. We should all be playing more. Also in Boston, the Harvard Graduate School of Education has a think tank on creativity called Project Zero. And one of the projects that came out of Project Zero is Agency by Design. And the researchers at Agency by Design spent 3 years studying the impacts of maker education, which you could think of robotics as a component of, on youth. And in the process, they found that there were certain thinking routines that makers engage in. So looking closely at an object, and I put this on a handout on all of your seats earlier. Actually, my friend Amir put them on all the seats. Thank you, Amir. But looking closely at an object, even things that we think of as simple, like a microphone or a phone, how is it designed? Who is it designed for? What are the choices that the designers made? Understanding the complexity of it. What systems is this part of? Who uses it? How do they engage with it? When do they engage with it? Does it bring them joy? Does it bring them frustration? And then imagining the alternatives or understanding the opportunities. How else might this be? So this is the thinking side of making or designing. But there's also the practical side of creating. And we see this in design thinking. So you might come up with lots of wonderful ideas, and I think in Dubai that happens quite a lot. If you go into any of the incubators or accelerators or co-working spaces, you see a lot of people with really wonderful ideas. You don't always see the technical skills to be able to create even some low-resolution prototypes. So the idea here is that through robotics or through other forms of design and technology or making, we can take our ideas and we can make them tangible so that we can test them. And there are a growing number of maker spaces here in the UAE where you can actually engage in this process pretty quickly. I was just down at the GE garages in Masdar, and they actually have it set up where you can use a 3D printer, like a commercial 3D printer, the kind you could have in your home, a MakerBot, develop a prototype, print it, test it, make changes to it, eventually bring it to an industrial 3D printer where you could get into finer details And then they have a CNC mill and an injection molder. So what normally a designer would have to send off to China and maybe get a prototype back 2 weeks later, you can actually do, if you're very skilled, in a day. If you need some support, in 2 to 3 days, which I think is something really exciting. And again, robotics is a very accessible way to engage in this kind of prototyping. So in the process of building a robot or learning how to, you certainly build some hard skills, the kinds that employers are looking for: mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, programming, and that's great. But after 3 years, what Agency by Design found was that the real difference came in a sense of empowerment and what they defined specifically as maker empowerment. The way that people who can create things, who can build and program a robot, view the world differently. They see themselves as agents of change. They see themselves as people who can not just understand problems, but participate in the creation of the solutions to these problems. And there's something about that that I think is exciting and joyful. So it's not a super clear picture, but it's just a group of students engaging in building a low-resolution prototype. No robots involved in that, but there was a lot of joy on this, and I thought I would share that. And so when we do that, when we see this as something simple and accessible and something that can be shared by everything, we can help youth become agents of change. People that we least expect, moms of the world, to become agents of change. I love this button, and I really need to make one for myself. So getting started, like I said, anyone can and should build a robot because it's a lot of fun to do. You can form or find a group. There are a lot of meetup groups out there for robotics, but you can also grab a few friends and buy some basic Lego robotics kits and get started. I had a yoga instructor one time, years and years ago, who said, "Don't try hard, try easy." If this is something new for you, you can begin with simple drag and drop programming. I have an example of a fun little robot over here, sorry, that if anyone wants to stay and try to program, you can just drag and drop, and you, before you leave today, could be a robotics programmer. It's a little alligator. It's got a sensor in it. It's good fun to use. The computer's charging over there. And play. Have fun with it. Hang out with people who are having fun with doing this. If you're trying to build a robot and you're struggling with it, if you type into Google, "I'm so annoyed, my robot won't work, it's doing this," you will probably come up with video tutorials showing you exactly how to fix that problem, because whatever you're doing, somebody else has probably struggled with before. And geek out. It's great to be a geek. And I'm going to finish off, if we have time, with a 3-minute video of some of my favorite geeks in Dubai. Oh, this is actually a picture I threw in here at the last minute. This chair was built by a micro carpenter robot, which I thought was kind of neat. Has anyone been to Origin Base? Okay, it's this new makerspace in Al Quoz. You can kind of drop in anytime and just see what people are making and building. You can find robots, drones. This doesn't involve robotics, but it's one of my favorite examples of people geeking out and having a great time. This is how they treated a steak at Origin Base. Oh, wait. Oh, do we have sound on this? Oh dear, buffering. I can narrate what's happening in it if it stops buffering. Okay. Come on. All right, I'll tell you what you're about to say. Has anyone ever had like a steak that's been stamped by something? Like where it's got like a logo stamped onto it. Usually they heat up like a branding iron. And okay, so this is much more awesome than that. Why stamp your steak when you can laser engrave it? So they actually ran a steak through a laser engraving machine. They designed their logo with CAD software and then used it to print on the steak, which is pretty neat. So we could probably just let this buffer while we're doing Q&A, and if it pops up. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Christine, thank you very much.